He strolled to the corner and glanced up and down the intersecting street, but saw nothing save the oasis of light shed by the street lamps at the successive crossings. Then he strolled back the way he had come. He was a shadow of a man sliding noiselessly and without undue movement through the semi-darkness. Also, he was very alert, like a wild animal in the jungle, keenly perceptive and receptive. The movement of another in the darkness about him would need to have been more shadowy than he to have escaped him. In addition to the running advertisement of the state of affairs carried to him by his senses, he had a subtler perception, a feel of the atmosphere around him. He knew that the house in front of which he paused for a moment contained children. Yet, by no willed effort of perception did he have this knowledge. For that matter, he was not even aware that he knew. So occult was the impression. Yet, did a moment arise in which action in relation to that house were imperative, he would have acted on the assumption that it contained children. He was not aware of all that he knew about the neighborhood. In the same way, he knew not how. He knew that no danger threatened in the footfalls that came up the street. Before he saw the walker, he knew him for a belated pedestrian hurrying home. The walker came into view at the crossing and disappeared on up the street. The man that watched noticed a light that flared up in the window of a house on the corner, and it died down. He knew it for the expiring of a match. This was conscious identification of a familiar phenomenon. And though his mind flitted the thought, wanted to know what time. In another house, one room was lighted. The light burned dimly and steadily, and he had a feel that it was a sick room. He was especially interested in a house across the street in the middle of the block. To this house he paid the most attention. No matter what way he looked, nor what way he walked, his looks and his steps always returned to it. Except for an open window above the porch, there was nothing unusual about the house. Nothing came in nor out, nothing happened. There was no lighted windows, nor had lights appeared and disappeared in any of the windows. Yet it was the central point of his consideration. He rallied to it each time after a divination of the state of the neighborhood. Despite his feelings, he was not confident. He was supremely conscious of the precariousness of his situation. Though unperturbed by the footfalls of a chance pedestrian, he was as keyed up and sensitive and ready to be startled as a timorous deer. He was aware of the possibility of other intelligences prowling about in the darkness. Intelligences similar to his own in movement, perception, and divination. Far down the street he caught a glimpse of something that moved, and he knew it was no late homegoer, but menace and danger. He whistled twice to the house across the street, then faded away shadow-like to the corner and around the corner. Here he paused and looked about him carefully. Reassured, he peered back around the corner and studied the object that moved and that was coming nearer. He had divined all right. It was a policeman. The man went down the cross street to the next corner, from the shelter of which he watched the corner he had left. He saw the policeman pass by, going straight on up the street. He paralleled the policeman's course, and from the next corner again watched him go by. Then he returned the way he had come. He whistled once to the house across the street, and after a time whistled once again. There was a reassurance in the whistle, just as there had been warning in the previous double whistle. He saw a dark bulk outline itself in the roof of the porch and slowly descend a pillar. Then it came down the steps, passed through the small iron gate, and went down the sidewalk, taking on the form of a man. He that watched kept on his own side of the street and moved on abreast to the corner, where he crossed over and joined the other. He was quite small alongside the man he accosted.
"How'd you make out, Matt?"
The other grunted indistinctly and walked on in silence a few steps. "I reckon I landed the goods." Jim chuckled in the darkness and waited for further information. Blocks passed by under their feet, and he grew impatient.
"Well, how about them goods? What kind of haul did you make out anyway?"
"I was too busy to figure it out, but it's fat. I can tell you that much, Jim. It's fat. I don't dast think how fat it is. Wait till we get to the room." Jim looked at him keenly under the street lamp of the next crossing and saw that his face was a trifle grim and that he carried his left arm peculiarly.
"What's the matter with your arm?"
"The little cuss bit me. Hope I don't get hydrophobia. Folks get hydrophobia from man bites sometimes, don't they?"
"Gave you a fight, eh?"
Jim asked encouragingly. The other grunted.
"You are certainly hard to get information from. Tell us about it. You ain't gonna lose money just telling a guy."
"I guess I choked him some. He woke up on me."
"You didn't need. I never heard a sound."
"Jim, it's a hanging matter. I fixed him. I had to. He woke up on me. You and me's gotta do some laying low for a spell." Jim gave a low whistle of comprehension.
"Did you hear me whistle?"
"Sure. I was all done. I was just coming out."
"It was a bull, but he wasn't on a little bit. Went right by and kept a patting the hoof out of sight. Then I came back and gave you the whistle. What made you take so long after that?"
"I was waiting to make sure. I was mighty glad when I heard your whistle again. It's hard work. I just sat there and thought and thought. Oh, all kinds of things. It's remarkable what a fellow will think about. And then there was that darn cat kept moving around the house and bothering me with its noises."
"And it's fat?"
"I'm sure telling you, Jim, it's fat. I'm plumb anxious for another look at him." Unconsciously, the two men quickened their pace, yet they did not relax from their caution. Twice, they changed their course in order to avoid policemen, and they made very sure that they were not observed when they dived into the dark hallway of a cheap rooming house downtown. Not until they had gained their own room on the top floor did they scratch a match. While Jim lighted the lamp, Matt locked the door and threw the bolts into place. As he turned, he noticed that his partner was waiting expectantly. Matt smiled to himself at the other's eagerness. "Them searchlights is all right," he said, drawing forth a small pocket electric lamp and examining it. "But we gotta get a new battery. It's running pretty weak. I thought once or twice it'd leave me in the dark. Funny arrangements in that house. I near got lost. His room was on the left, and that fooled me some."
"I told you it was on the left."
"You told me it was on the right. I guess I know what you told me. And there's the map you drew." Fumbling in his pocket, he drew a folded slip of paper. As he unfolded it, Jim bent over and looked.
"I did make a mistake."
"You sure did. It got me guessing some for a while."
"But it don't matter now. Let's see what you got."
"It does matter. It matters a lot to me. I've got to run all the risk. I put my head in a trap while you stay on the street. You gotta get on by yourself and be more careful." "All right, I'll show you." He dipped loosely into his trouser pockets and brought out a handful of small diamonds. He spilled them out in a blazing stream on a greasy table. Jim let out a great oath. "That's nothing. I ain't begun yet." From one pocket after another, he continued bringing forth the spoil. There were many diamonds wrapped in chamois skin that were larger than those in the first handful. From one pocket, he brought out a handful of very small cut gems. "Sun dust," he remarked, as he spilled them on the table in a space by themselves. Jim examined them.
"Just the same, they retail for a couple of dollars each. Is that all?"
"Ain't it enough?"
Sure it is. Better than I expected. I wouldn't take a cent less than 10,000 for the bunch.
10,000? They're worth twice that. And I don't know anything about jewelry either. Look at that big boy. He picked it out from the sparkling heap and held it up near the lamp with an air of expert weighing and judging.
Worth 1,000, all by its lonely.
1,000? Your grandmother. You couldn't buy it for 3.
Wake me up. I'm dreaming.
The sparkle of gems was in Jim's eyes, and he began sorting out the larger diamonds and examining them.
We're rich men, Matt. We'll be regular swells.
It'll take years to get rid of them.
But think how we live. Nothing to do but spend money and go on getting rid of them.
Matt's eyes were beginning to sparkle, though somberly, as his phlegmatic nature woke up. I told you I didn't dash think how fat it was.
What a killing. What a killing.
I almost forgot, Matt said, thrusting his hand into his inside coat pocket. A string of large pearls emerged from wrappings of tissue paper and chamois skin. Jim scarcely glanced at them.
They're worth money,
he said, and returned to the diamonds. Jim played with gems, running them through his fingers, sorting them into piles, and spreading them out flat and wide. He was a slender, weazened man, nervous, irritable, high-strung, and anemic. A typical child of the gutter, with unbeautiful twisted features, small eyes, with a face and mouth perpetually and feverishly hungry. Brutish in a cat-like way, stamped to the core with degeneracy. Matt did not finger the diamonds. He sat, with chin on hands, an elbow on table, blinking heavily at the blazing array. He was in every way a contrast to the other. No city had bred him. He was heavy-muscled and hairy, gorilla-like in strength and aspect. For him, there was no unseen world. His eyes were full and wide apart, and there seemed in him a certain bold brotherliness. They inspired confidence, but a closer inspection would have shown that his eyes were just a trifle too full, just a shade too wide apart. He exceeded, spilled over the limits of normality, and his features told lies about the man beneath.
The bunch is worth 50,000.
100,000. The silence returned and endured a long time, to be broken again by Jim.
What in the blazes is he doing with them all at that house? That's what I want to know. I just thought he's kept them in the safe down at the store.
Matt had just been considering the vision of the throttled man as he looked upon him in the dim light of the electric lantern, but he did not start at the mention of him. There's no telling. He might have been getting ready to chuck his partner. He might have pulled out in the morning for parts unknown if we hadn't happened along. Guess there's just as many thieves among honest men as there is among thieves. You read about such things in the paper, Jim. Partners is always knifing each other. A queer, nervous look came in the other's eyes. Matt did not betray that he noticed it, though he said, "What was you thinking, Jim?" Jim was a trifle awkward for a moment.
Nothing. Only I was thinking just how funny it was. All them jewels at that house. What made you ask?
Nothing. I was just wondering, that's all. The silence settled down, broken by an occasional low and nervous giggle on the part of Jim. He was overcome by the spread of gems. It was not that he felt their beauty. He was unaware that they were beautiful in themselves, but in them, his swift imagination visioned the joys of life they would buy, and all the desires and appetites of his deceased mind and sickly flesh tickled by the promise they extended. He builded wondrous, orgy-haunted castles out of their brilliant fires, and was appalled at what he builded. Then it was that he giggled. It was all too impossible to be real, and yet There they blazed on the table before him, fanning the flames of the lust of him, and he giggled again. I guess we might as well count 'em. You watch me, and see that it's square, because you and me has got to be square, Jim. Understand? Jim did not like this, and betrayed it in his eyes, while Matt did not like what he saw in his partner's eyes. Understood? Matt repeated, almost menacingly.
Ain't we always been square?
The other replied on the defensive, what of the treachery already whispered in him? It don't cost nothing to be square in hard times. It's being square in prosperity that counts. When we ain't got nothing, can't help but being square. We're prosperous now, and we've got to be businessmen. Honest businessmen. You understand?
That's the talk for me.
Jim approved, but deep down in the meager soul of him, and in spite of him, wanton and lawless thoughts were stirring like chained beasts. Matt stepped to the food shelf behind the 2-burner kerosene cooking stove. He emptied the tea from a paper bag, and from a second bag emptied some red peppers. Returning to the table with the bags, he put into them 2 sizes of small diamonds. Then he counted the large gems and wrapped them in their tissue paper and chamois skin. 147 good-sized ones, 20 real big ones, 2 big boys and 1 whopper, and a couple of fistfuls of teeny ones and dust. He looked at Jim.
Correct.
He wrote the count on a slip of memorandum paper and made a copy of it, giving 1 slip to his partner and retaining the other, just for reference. Again, he had recourse to the food shelf, where he emptied the sugar from a large paper bag. Into this he thrust the diamonds, large and small, wrapped it up in a bandana handkerchief, and stowed it away under his pillow. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and took off his shoes.
And you think they're worth 100,000?
Jim asked, pausing and looking up from the unlacing of his shoe. Sure, I seen a dancer in Arizona once, with some big sparkles on her. They wasn't real. She said if they was, she wouldn't be dancing. Said they'd be worth all 50,000, and she didn't have a dozen of them all told.
Who'd work for a living? Pick and shovel work? Work like a dog all my life, and save all my wages, and I wouldn't have half as much as we got to tonight.
Dishwashing's about your measure, and you couldn't get more than 20 a month on board. Your figures is way off, but your point is well taken. Let them that likes it work. I rode range for 30 a month when I was young and foolish. Well, I'm older, and I ain't riding range. He got into bed on one side. Jim put out the light and followed him in the other side.
How's your arm feel?
Such concern was unusual, and Matt noted it and replied, I guess there's no danger of hydrophobia. What made you ask? Jim felt himself a guilty stir, and under his breath he cursed the other's way of asking disagreeable questions.
Nothing. Only you seemed scared of it at first. What are you going to do with your share, Matt?
Buy a cattle ranch in Arizona and sit down and pay other men to do ride range for me. There's several I'd like to see asking a job from me. Blast them. And now you shut your face, Jim. It'll be some time before I buy that ranch. Just now I'm going to sleep. But Jim lay long awake, nervous and twitching, rolling about restlessly and rolling himself wide awake every time he dozed. The diamonds still blazed under his eyelids, and the fire of them hurt. Matt, in spite of being heavy in nature, slept lightly, like a wild animal alert in its sleep, and Jim noticed every time he moved that his partner's body moved sufficiently to show that it had received the impression and that it was trembling on the verge of awakening. For that matter, Jim did not know whether or not frequently the other was awake. Once, quietly, betokeningly complete consciousness, Matt said to him, "Oh, Go to sleep, Jim. Don't worry about them jewels. They'll keep. And Jim thought at that particular moment, Matt had been surely asleep. In the late morning, Matt was awake with Jim's first movement, and therefore he awoke and dozed with him until midday, when they got up together and began dressing. I'm going out to get some paper and some bread. You boil the coffee. As Jim listened unconsciously, his gaze left Matt's face and roved to the pillow, beneath which was the bundle wrapped in the bandana handkerchief. On the instant, Matt's face became like a wild beast. Look here, Jim. You gotta play me square. If you do me dirt, I'll fix you, understand? I'd eat you, Jim. You know that? I'd bite right into your throat, eat you like that much beefsteak. His sunburned skin was black with a surge of blood in it, and his tobacco-stained teeth were exposed by snarling lips. Jim shivered and involuntarily cowered. There was death in the man he looked at. Only the night before, that black-faced man had killed another with his hands, and it had not hurt his sleep. And in his own heart, Jim was aware of the sneaking guilt, of a train of thought that merited all that was threatened. Matt passed out, leaving him still shivering. Then a hatred twisted his own face, and he softly hurled savage threats at the door. He remembered the jewels, and hastened to the bed, feeling under the pillow for a bandana bundle. He crushed it with his fingers to make certain that it still contained the diamonds. Assured that Matt had not carried them away, he looked towards the kerosene stove with a guilty start. Then he hurriedly lighted it, filled the coffee pot at the sink, and put it over the flame. The coffee was boiling when Matt returned, and while the latter cut the bread and put a slice of butter on the table, Jim poured out the coffee. It was not until he sat down and had taken a few sips of the coffee that Matt pulled out the morning paper from his pocket. We was way off. I told you I didn't dast figure out how fat it was. Look at that. He pointed to the headlines on the first page.
Swift nemesis on Bujanov's track. Murdered in his sleep after robbing his partner.
There you have it. He robbed his partner. Robbed him like a dirty thief.
$500,000 in jewels missing?
He put the paper down and stared at Matt. That's what I told you. What in thunder do we know about jewels? $500,000? And the best I could figure it was 100,000? Go and read the rest of it. They read on silently, their heads side by side, the untouched coffee growing cold, and ever and anon one or the other burst forth with some salient printed face.
I'd like to have seen Metzner's face when he opened that safe at the store in the morning.
He hit the high places right away at Bujanov's house. Go on and read.
Was to have sailed last night at 10 on Sajota for the South Seas. Steamship delayed by extra freight.
That's why we caught him in bed, Matt interrupted. It was just luck, like picking a 50-to-1 winner.
Sajota sailed at 6 this morning.
He didn't catch her. I saw his alarm clock was set at 5. That had given him plenty of time. Only I come along and put the kibosh on his time. Go on.
Adolf Metzner in despair. The famous Hawthorne pearl necklace. Magnificently assorted pearls valued by experts at $50,000 to $70,000. Those oyster eggs are worth all that money?
He licked his lips and added,
They was beauties, and no mistake. Big Brazilian gem, $80,000. Many valuable gems of the first water, several thousand small diamonds well worth $40,000.
What you don't know about jewels is worth knowing.
Theory of sleuths. Thieves must have known. Cleverly kept watch of Bujanov's actions. Must have learned his plan and trailed him to his house with the fruits of his robbery.
Clever. That's the way reputation is made in those newspapers. How'd we know he was robbing his partner?
Anyway, we've got the goods. Let's look at 'em again.
He assured himself that the door was locked and bolted, while Matt brought out the bundle and the bandana and opened it on the table.
Ain't they beauties, though?
Jim exclaimed at the sight of the pearls, and for a time he had eyes only for them.
According to the experts, worth from $50,000 to $70,000.
And women like them things.
And they'll do everything to get them. Sell themselves, commit murder, anything. Just like you and me.
Not on your life. I'll commit murder for them, but not for their own sake, but for the sake of what they'll get me. That's the difference. Women want the jewels for themselves, and I want the jewels for the women and such things they'll get me.
Lucky that men and women don't want the same things.
That's what makes commerce. People wanting different things. In the middle of the afternoon, Jim went out to buy food. While he was gone, Matt cleared the table of the jewels, wrapping them up as before and putting them under the pillow. Then he lighted the kerosene stove and started to boil water for the coffee. A few minutes later, Jim returned.
Most surprising. Streets and stores and people just like they always was. Nothing changed, and me walking along through it all a millionaire. Nobody looked at me and guessed it.
Matt grunted unsympathetically. He had little comprehension of the lighter whims and fancies of his partner's imagination. You get a porterhouse?
Sure. An inch thick. It's a peach. Look at it.
He wrapped the steak and held it up for the other's inspection. Then he made the coffee and set the table, while Matt fried the steak.
Don't put on too much of them red peppers. I ain't used to your Mexican cooking. You always season too hot.
Matt grunted a laugh and went on with his cooking. Jim poured out the coffee, but first, into the nicked china cup, he emptied a powder he had carried in his vest pocket wrapped in rice paper. He had turned his back for a moment on his partner, but he did not dare glance around him. Matt placed a newspaper on the table, and on the newspaper set the hot frying pan. He cut the steak in half and served Jim and himself. Eat her while she's hot, he counseled, and with a knife and fork set the example.
She's a dandy. But I tell you one thing straight, I'm never gonna visit you on that Arizona ranch, so you needn't ask me.
What's the matter now?
The Mexican cooking on your ranch would be too much for me. If I've got blue blazes a-coming in the next life, I'm not gonna torment my insides in this one.
He smiled and expelled his breath forcibly to cool his burning mouth, drank some coffee, and went on eating the steak.
What do you think about the next life anyway, Matt?
He asked a little later, while secretly he wondered why the other had not yet touched his coffee. Ain't no next life, Matt answered, pausing from the steak to take his first sip of coffee. Nor heaven, nor hell, nor nothing. You get all that's coming right here in this life.
And afterward?
Jim queried out of his morbid curiosity, for he knew that he looked upon a man that was soon to die.
And afterward?
Did you ever see a man 2 weeks dead? Jim shook his head. Well, I have. He was like this beefsteak you and me is eating. There was once steer coverting over the landscape, but now it's just meat. That's all. Just meat. And that's what you and me and all people come to. Meat. Matt gulped down the whole cup of coffee and refilled the cup. Are you scared to die? Jim shook his head.
What's the use? I don't die anyway. I pass on and live again.
To go stealing and lying and sniveling through another life and go on that way forever and ever and ever.
Maybe I'll improve. Maybe stealing won't be necessary in the life to come.
He ceased abruptly and stared straight before him, a frightened expression on his face. What's the matter?
Nothing.
I was just wondering. Jim returned himself with an effort.
About this dying, that was all.
But he could not shake off the fright that had startled him. It was as if an unseen thing of gloom had passed him by, casting upon him an intangible shadow of its presence. He was aware of the feeling of foreboding. Something ominous was about to happen. Calamity hovering in the air. He gazed fixedly across the table at the man. He could not understand. Was it that he had blundered and poisoned himself? No. Matt had the nicked cup, and he had certainly put the poison in the nicked cup. It was all his own imagination, was his next thought. It had played him tricks before. Fool, of course it was. Of course something was about to happen, but it was about to happen to Matt. Had not Matt drunk the whole cup of coffee? Jim brightened up and finished his steak, sopping bread in the gravy when the meat was gone.
When I was a kid,
he began, but broke off abruptly. Again, the unseen thing of gloom had fluttered, and his being was vibrant with premonition and impending misfortune. He felt a disruptive influence at work in the flesh of him, and in all his muscles there was a seeming that they were about to begin to twitch. He sat back suddenly, and as suddenly leaned forward with his elbows on the table. Tremor ran dimly through the muscles of his body. It was like the first rustling of leaves before the oncoming of a wind. He clenched his teeth. It came again, a spasmodic tensing of his muscles. He knew panic at the revolt within his being, his muscles no longer recognizing his mastery over him. Again, they spasmodically tensed despite the will of him, for he had willed that they should not tense. This was revolution within himself. This was anarchy, and the terror of impotence rushed up on him as his flesh gripped and seemed to seize him in a clutch. Chills running up and down his back and sweat starting on his brow. He glanced about the room, and all the details of it smote him with a strange sense of familiarity. It was as though he had just returned from a long journey. He looked across the table at his partner. Matt was watching him and smiling. An expression of horror spread over Jim's face.
Matt, you ain't doped me.
Matt smiled and continued to watch him. In the paroxysm that followed, Jim did not become unconscious. His muscles tensed and twitched and knotted, hurting him and crushing him in their savage grip. And in the midst of it all, it came to him that Matt was acting queerly. He was traveling the same road. The smile had gone from his face, and there was on it an intense expression, as if he were listening to some inner tale of himself and trying to divine the message. Matt got up and walked across the room and back again, then sat down. You did this, Jim.
But I didn't think you'd try to fix me.
Oh, I fixed you all right, Matt said with teeth closed together and shivering body. What did you give me?
Strychnine.
Same as I gave you. It's some mess, ain't it?
You're lying, Matt. You ain't doped me, have you?
I sure did, Jim. And I didn't overdose you neither. I cooked it in as neat as you please in your half of the porterhouse. Hold on. Where's you going? Jim had made a dash for the door and was throwing back the bolts. Matt sprang in between and shoved him away.
Drugstore,
Jim panted.
Drugstore.
No, you don't. You'll stay right here. There ain't gonna be any running out and making a poison play on the street. Not with all them jewels reposing under the pillow. Savvy? Even if you didn't die, you'd be in the hands of the police with a lot of explanations coming. Emetics is the stuff for poison. I'm just as big as you, and I'm going to take an emetic. That's all they'd give you at the drugstore anyway. He thrust Jim back into the middle of the room and shot the bolts into place. As he went across the floor to the food shelf, he passed one hand over his brow and flung off the beaded sweat. It spattered audibly on the floor. Jim watched agonizingly as Matt got the mustard can and cup and ran for the sink. He stirred a cup full of mustard and water and drank it down. Jim had followed him and was reaching with trembling hands for the empty cup. Again, Matt shoved him away. As he mixed a second cupful, he demanded, "Do you think one cup will do for me? You can wait till I'm done." Jim started to totter towards the door, but Matt checked him. "If you monkey with that door, I'll twist your neck, savvy? You can take yours when I'm done. And if it saves you, I'll twist your neck anyway. You ain't got no chance, no how." I told you many times what you'd get if you did me dirt.
But you did me dirt too,
Jim articulated with effort. Matt was drinking the second cupful and did not answer. The sweat had gotten into Jim's eyes and he could scarcely see his way to the table, where he got a cup for himself. But Matt was mixing a third cupful and, as before, thrust him away. I told you to wait till I was done. Get out of my way. Jim supported his twitching body by holding onto the sink. All the while he yearned toward the yellowish concoction that stood for life. It was by sheer will that he stood and clung to the sink. His flesh strove to double him up and bring him to the floor. Matt drank the third cupful, and with difficulty managed to get to the chair and sit down. His first paroxysm was passing. The spasms that afflicted him were dying. This good effect he ascribed to be the mustard and the water. He was safe, at any rate. He wiped the sweat from his face and, in the interval of calm, found room for curiosity. He looked at his partner. A spasm had shaken the mustard can out of Jim's hands, and the contents were spilled upon the floor. He stooped to scoop some of the mustard into the cup, and the succeeding spasm doubled him up on the floor. Matt smiled. Stay with it. It's the stuff all right. Fix me up. Jim heard him and turned toward him with a stricken face, twisted with suffering and pleading. Spasm now followed spasm till he was in convulsions, rolling on the floor and yellowing his face and hair in the mustard. Matt laughed hoarsely at the sight, but the laugh broke midway. A tremor had run through his body. A new paroxysm was beginning. He arose and staggered across to the sink, where, with a probing forefinger, he vainly strove to assist the action of the emetic. In the end, he clung to the sink as Jim had clung, filled with horror of going down to the floor. The other's paroxysm had passed, and he sat up, weak and fainting, too weak to rise, his forehead dripping, his lips flecked with a foam made yellow by mustard in which he had rolled. He rubbed his eyes with his knuckles, and groans that were like whines came from his throat. What are you sniffling about? All you got to do is die. And when you die, you're dead.
I ain't sniffling. It's the mustard stinging my eyes.
It was his last successful attempt at speech. Thereafter he babbled incoherently, pawing the air with shaking arms till a fresh convulsion stretched him out on the floor. Matt struggled to get to the chair, and doubled up upon it. With his arms clasped about his knees, he fought with his disintegrating flesh. He came out of the convulsion cool and weak. He looked to see how it went with the other, and saw him lying motionless. He tried to soliloquize, to be facetious, to have his last grim laugh at life, but his lips made only incoherent sounds. The thought came to him that the emetic had failed, and that nothing remained but the drugstore. He looked toward the door, and drew himself to his feet. There, he saved himself from falling by clutching the chair. Another paroxysm had begun, and in the midst of that paroxysm, with his body and all the parts of it flying apart and writhing and twisting back again into knots, he clung to the chair and shoved it before him across the floor. The last shreds of his will were leaving him when he gained the door. He turned the key and shot back one bolt. He fumbled for a second bolt, but failed. Then he leaned his weight against the door and slid down gently to the floor.
End of Just Meat by Jack London. I am Drake Godoon, and thank you for listening.